Ladies and gentlemen, if I could ask you to take your seats, please. Thank you very much. Well, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and a very warm welcome to the Australian-British Chamber of Commerce's Defence Industry Lunch. The bells are ringing, and here we are in the fabulous Strangers Room at the New South Wales House of Parliament. It's our absolute delight to have the Minister, the Hon Pat Conroy, Minister for Defence Industry and Capability Delivery, a new title, Minister for International Development and the Pacific. And may I be the first publicly here to congratulate you on your elevation to Cabinet. And I can think of no more worthy minister and no more worthy portfolio to now be sitting in Cabinet. So that's absolutely fantastic for us. As I say, the beautiful Strangers Room, and I'd like to acknowledge the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation on whose land we're gathered on today and pay respects to their elders, past and present. I'd also like to acknowledge the Honourable Marise Payne, who's a former Foreign Minister and Senator, who's here today. Great to have you here, Marise. And I'd like to thank our event sponsors, Babcock, Kinetic, Anduril and Laing O'Rourke for their support, and to our principal sponsors in attendance, BAE Systems, Investment New South Wales, Lend-Lease, Mott MacDonald and Robert Walters. Thank you all. Look, it's been brilliant to have that networking time for the Minister, and I hope a number of the smaller businesses, some of which are members of ours, we've got the Anduril supply chain here, and a number of Pillar 2s here, so that's been wonderful to do. It is a really critical year for AUKUS. Everyone's got an opinion. It seems 2 out of 3 of the AUKUS countries we know have an election this year, and possibly 3. In fact, it might be getting more and more likely looking how the stock market's fallen out of bed, but we'll see. But anyway, there have been many big decisions already made, big reviews done, and we are moving forward. So very much looking forward to hearing from the Minister. So the order of proceedings is that we'll let you eat your entrees and begin your starters, and then Gary Stewart, CEO of Kinetic Australasia, will give us some introductory remarks and welcome the Minister. We'll hear from the Minister, who's kindly agreed to do a Q&A with me, but very much involving all of you as well. And then Andrew Cridland, CEO of Babcock Australia, will have some closing remarks and give a vote of thanks. So please enjoy your entree. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, I think that's the first time without a glass tap, so that's lovely to get started. Ladies and gentlemen, my name's Gary Stewart. I am the Chief Executive for Kinetic here in Australia, Canada, Germany, and also part of the UK, interestingly. I'll touch on that shortly. But it's my pleasure to welcome and introduce Minister Conroy, who will give the main address today over lunch. As many of you know, Honourable Pat Conroy was elevated to the Australian Cabinet last week as the Minister for Defence Industry and Capability Delivery, as well as the Minister for International Development and the Pacific. That said, he is more affectionately known to the Prime Minister and his Cabinet colleagues as the Minister for Missiles. And as one of Australia's and the world's largest test and evaluation enterprises, Kinetic also affectionately refers to the Minister as the Minister for Test and Evaluation. Since the election of the Albanese government, Minister Conroy has been instrumental with the Deputy Prime Minister around seeking genuine reform to the Department of Defence and introducing and accelerating real capability to our warfighter. The development of the Defence Strategic Review, the National Defence Strategy, the Defence Integrated Investment Program are hallmark outcomes of the first almost 3 years of the Minister's term in this government, and sets the policy foundation for what is a really vital piece of our national security agenda. His new ministerial title and responsibility includes capability delivery, and this is the clearest indication yet of the Albanese government's determination and seriousness to ensure that defence projects deliver capability to the Australian Defence Force and to our warfighters. In many ways, he could be seen as the Minister for Defence Accountability. To that end, his decision to include defence test and evaluation capability and certification assurance as one of the 7 sovereign defence industry priorities demonstrates the importance of the work that companies like Kinetic provide for defence. Test and evaluation is key to ensuring that defence capability works as intended, that our operational commanders understand the capabilities that they're charged with in undertaking their missions for our national security, and being able to stand in front of our Minister and our Cabinet in times of need to say, Minister, we are able to deploy and able to discharge your mission. Kinetic has invested more than $100 million over the last 3 years here in Australia to build a sovereign T&E workforce. Of the over 850 people I've got in this country, over 250 of them are T&E practitioners. We are transferring and planning to transfer test and evaluation capabilities necessary for nuclear-powered submarines, guided weapons, long-range strike, and other fundamental capabilities outlined in this National Defence Strategy. We deliver realistic threat representation, not just to Australia, and my team delivers that also to AUKUS, to the Quad, to the Five Eyes, and to NATO, all led from an incredible team here from Australia to our friends and allies around the world. Minister Conroy has been instrumental in supporting our industry's work in this area and has been a positive advocate for the reform of defence, no less indicated by now his appointment to the Cabinet and responsibility for capability delivery. Ladies and gentlemen, it's my great pleasure to welcome Minister Conroy to address you. Thank you.
Thank you. I begin by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land, the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation, and pay my respects to their elders past, present and emerging. As Minister for Defence Industry and Capability Delivery, I also pay my respects to Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander men and women who have served our nation in the past and continue to do so today. And I thank current and former ADF personnel for their service. Chief Executive Officer of the British Chamber of Commerce, Tikki Fullerton, former Senator and Foreign Affairs Minister and Defence Minister Maurice Payne, lovely to see you here. And I think Senator Ross Cadell, also RSVP'd, who, more important than being a senator, is my constituent, so welcome Ross if you're here. Distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, thank you Gary for your very kind introduction. I will slightly correct the nickname I'm known by. It's the Minister for Missiles and the Minister for Rugby League as well, recognising my Pacific responsibilities. It is a pleasure to join you here today. And everyone, please keep eating. I guarantee you I sound better on a full stomach. So please chomp away at your beef. 1 month ago, we saw the orderly, peaceful transfer of power in the United Kingdom following a general election. And while unremarkable to British and Australians alike, this is something that is still unthinkable in many parts of the world. Democracy is so deeply ingrained in our shared political culture that we forget to notice how remarkable it is. Although the British innovation of having all the candidates stand on the stage while the results is announced is an innovation I'm probably not keen to see in Australia. Now in the United Kingdom, we have a newly elected Labor government, and following the first phone call between Prime Minister Starmer and Prime Minister Albanese, it is clear that their view of the world is remarkably alike. They share an assessment of the key challenges facing the region, including strategic competition and climate change. They share a view on the strengths of the AUKUS partnership, and we welcome Prime Minister Starmer's commitment to building on its strength. and they share a commitment to the Commonwealth Heads of Government, which will meet in Samoa later this year, and to multilateralism more broadly. Their commitments reflect the shared values of our two great countries. And as I stand before members of the British Chamber of Commerce today, I see many who share our government's vision of a stronger, more secure Australia in a peaceful, safe and prosperous region. Many of you not only share our vision, you're invested in it, working to supply the critical infrastructure and capabilities needed by the Australian Defence Force to fulfil its mission. These partnerships are critical to the strength of the ADF and are a vital element of the strong and growing partnership between Australia and the United Kingdom. And that partnership is more important than ever before as we look to face the challenges of an increasingly complex strategic environment. For Australia's part, the comforts we've relied upon in the past, from strategic warning time to the security of distance, have evaporated. Entrenched and increasing strategic competition is now the primary feature of our security environment. It is accompanied by an unprecedented military build-up in our region, taking place without strategic reassurance or transparency. Ladies and gentlemen, the global rules-based order is under increasing pressure. Grey zone activities have expanded. Terrorism remains a constant threat. Cyber threats posed by state and non-state actors are multiplying, and climate change is compounding all the challenges to stability and prosperity. Australia and the United Kingdom share an understanding that Russia's invasion of Ukraine is not only horrific and immoral, it is also a threat to continental Europe and a conflict with global geostrategic significance. Russia wants to take us back to a world where spheres of interest reign, where only great powers are truly sovereign and their actions are above the law. This is not a world where the people of Australia or the people of the UK would thrive. And that is why we are so committed to supporting Ukraine to end the conflict on its terms, and to working with the United Kingdom to train Ukrainian troops and support Ukraine's most critical defence needs. What matters in Europe matters in the Indo-Pacific. The Indo-Pacific region is both an economic engine of global significance and the epicentre of strategic contest that is shaping everything around it. What happens here matters everywhere, and that is understood from Sydney to London. I was at the Munich Security Conference last year, and the message came through loud and clear that the Indo-Pacific matters like it has never before to the leaders of Europe. The Albanese government has done the hard work undertaking a root and branch review of our strategic landscape and the posture our Defence Force requires to meet these challenges. The review, the Defence Strategic Review, is our strategic blueprint. And from it we've established the inaugural National Defence Strategy and the complete rebuild of the Integrated Investment Program, Defence's 10-year procurement schedule, so that it aligns with the strategic problems that was articulated by the DSR itself. We've backed our plan with the biggest funding commitment in decades. The days of business as usual in defence are over. We've established a defence industry development strategy to make defence a much better partner to industry and to grow and secure a defence industry that is strong, sovereign and sustainable. Prioritisation is essential in this process. The sovereign defence industrial priorities, as Gary highlighted, identify the things we must be able to do in Australia to build, sustain and enhance defence capability. This means having the knowledge, know-how, workforce and infrastructure in Australia to deliver the industrial capabilities we require. Our strategic environment requires an holistic view that moves beyond the narrow lens of solely using Australian-owned businesses when seeking to define our sovereign defence industrial capability requirements. However, there will be circumstances where Australian ownership is required for our national interest, such as the development and integration of sensitive technologies. The DIDS is designed to make Defence a much more active partner with industry, supporting businesses to increase their scale and competitiveness to enable them to deliver the sovereign defence industrial priorities. Our approach is to move Australian businesses up the value chain and lay the foundation for Australian businesses to be embedded into global supply chains. The Defence Trade Controls Amendment Act 2024, the DTC, demonstrates our commitment. It removes red tape in defence trade with our AUKUS partners by supporting the establishment of a licence-free environment for Australian industry, higher education and research partners. This is a once-in-a-generational reform. It removes the requirement for approximately 900 export permits valued at $5 billion per year, which would otherwise be required for exports from Australia to the United Kingdom and United States. The door is now wide open for faster, better and easier bilateral defence industry cooperation. Now, ladies and gentlemen, Australia and the UK are both island trading nations. No one understands better than we do the strategic significance of nuclear-powered submarines. And no capability acquisition is bigger, more important or more complex than the acquisition of conventionally armed nuclear-powered submarines through our AUKUS partnership. AUKUS is no longer a concept. It is a plan, a funded plan that is well advanced in its execution. It will entwine our industrial bases for decades to come. SSN AUKUS is the future state-of-the-art nuclear-powered submarine to be built and operated by both Australia and the United Kingdom. It will be based off the next-generation UK design, importantly incorporating elements from Australia and the United States. And together we're making real and powerful progress. Australia is contributing $4.6 billion over 10 years to expand the production capacity of Rolls-Royce submarines in Derby and to contribute to SSN AUKUS design costs. Australian steel from Bisalloy is undergoing qualification tests for use in Australia's first SSN AUKUS submarine. We've broken ground on the preliminary enabling works for the submarine construction yard at Osborne in SA. The first 3 Royal Australian Navy officers have graduated from the Royal Navy's nuclear reactor course in the UK, and Australian industry personnel have undertaken rotations at Rolls-Royce, BAE Systems and Babcock within the UK defence industry. We've selected ASC and BAE as Australia's sovereign submarine build partners, and BAE Systems, as everyone knows, is the UK's long-term submarine build partner. They bring more than 60 years of nuclear-powered submarine building experience, world-class industrial capability and intellectual property to the partnership. BAE is the nexus between SSN AUKUS design, led by BAE Systems in the UK, where Australian experts are already working alongside their peers, and the development and maturation of the SSN AUKUS build strategy in Australia. The pathway by which we acquire a nuclear-powered submarine capability will see an Australian-flagged Navy-powered submarine in the water a full decade sooner than what was planned when we came to government. And at the same time, Pillar 2 of AUKUS, advanced capabilities, is moving ahead at pace. And I know there are many companies in the room today either involved or very keen to get involved in Pillar 2. Under Pillar 2, we're building capability development ecosystems that will accelerate the delivery of cutting-edge capabilities to the Australian, UK and US Armed Forces. We are turbocharging collaboration between our respective defence, innovation and industry sectors. The AUKUS Innovation Challenges are one of the genuinely new and exciting approaches we are taking to the most complex military problems we're facing. Each challenge is drawn from a trilaterally agreed problem set that our Defence Force is facing. The first, on electronic warfare, was launched in March. And Pillar 2 is proving to be a potent technology accelerant. In April last year, an AUKUS artificial intelligence autonomy trial took place in the UK. Last year in SA, AUKUS partners conducted a trial of trusted operation of robotic vehicles in a contested environment. And we conducted an undersea warfare trial off the east coast of Australia. Each trial takes the AUKUS nations closer to tangible technological achievements that would take us closer to tangible technological advancements than we would achieve on our own. Defence industry will have an increasingly important role in the development of AUKUS advanced capabilities. And to that end, we've formed the AUKUS Industry Forum to be the primary standing interface between trilateral governments and the industry. The other great nation-building project we have underway is the Naval Shipbuilding and Sustainment Enterprise. The Albanese government has committed to the most ambitious shipbuilding plan in Australian industry, funded by the most significant investment in Navy surface fleet in decades. We have committed to build 6 Hunter-class frigates in South Australia, and the Hunter-class frigate will be the most advanced anti-submarine warfare vessel in the world. In June, we cut the first piece of steel to be used on the first Hunter-class frigate, and that kicks off the construction phase of the Hunter-class frigate program that will run for 20 years. At its peak, it will support around 3,000 direct jobs and a further 5,000 indirect jobs in the Australian supply chain. There will be jobs in many Australian small and medium-sized enterprises who will supply materials, equipment and parts like valves, steel, pipe, cable and ship's furniture for the first 3 Hunter-class frigates. Queensland's Craig International Ballistics, for example, will supply dozens of armoured windows for each frigate with protective qualities including ballistic protection. Redark Australia will supply 79 different types of lights, more than 12,000 LED lights in total. Cold Logic from South Australia will build and install bespoke cold and cool rooms along with refrigeration machinery. CEA Radars, the most advanced radar company in the world, will provide their radars for the frigate. And Babcock Australia is designing and manufacturing the air weapons handling system. According to BAE, contracts with Australian suppliers now amount to over 60% of its Australian contract expenditure in what is still only the early design and prototyping phase of the program. That's a great outcome and one we want to see continue and to grow. And that is just one part of our naval shipbuilding strategy where we'll more than double the size of the surface combatant fleet. Now, the National Defence Strategy makes clear that the UK is one of Australia's key defence partners. Earlier this year, we signed a refreshed Defence and Security Cooperation Agreement which reflects our commitment to a more modern and dynamic defence partnership. The agreement includes status of forces provisions that make it easier for our forces to operate together in each other's countries, as we're doing with the Ukrainian training in the UK, and as the UK will do through its contribution to Submarine Rotation Force West in Australia. Alongside the agreement, we've embarked on a number of new initiatives to deepen our cooperation. These include UK contributions to the Combined Intelligence Centre Australia, development of a joint climate action plan by Auckland 2025, establishment of senior level staff talks at the joint operational level, and ever closer engagement on key enablers like science and technology and the health of our workforce. So in conclusion, the modern relationship between Australia and the United Kingdom is built on trust and respect. On the ocean, our Navy works with the United Kingdom's 2 offshore patrol vessels based in the Indo-Pacific and other vessels the UK deploys to our region. On the ground, our forces work hand in hand in exercises of remarkable complexity. In the air, Australia and UK Air Forces work together to enable strategic lift and demonstrate the ability to flow forces rapidly from the Euro-Atlantic to the Indo-Pacific. All countries that benefit from the rules-based international order need to play a part in safeguarding it. Island nations like Australia and the United Kingdom are significant beneficiaries of the global rules-based order, so it's right that we work together with our regional partners to support the security and resilience of the region. So thank you for the opportunity to speak to you today about how Australia is playing our part and in partnership with the UK. I look forward to your questions, but thank you again for the kind invite.
Minister, that's great. If I could sit to you there. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, Patrick. Put it back. Thank you. Well, with military precision, 125, Minister, that was extremely good. Thank you so much.
Capability delivered on time, Vicky.
Very interesting thoughts that you've thrown out there. First of all, congratulations again on rising to Cabinet. How does having this ministry in Cabinet make a difference? Because, of course, I automatically think budget. You've got two voices there.
Well, the simple answer is it doubles the number of defence voices around the Cabinet table. Richard Marles, as Deputy Prime Minister, is extraordinarily influential in Cabinet and in government, and we've seen the benefit of that through an increase of roughly 20% in real terms in the defence budget over the next decade. But having another voice helps in Cabinet. It gets more resources into the portfolio, and it complements the close cooperation that Richard and I have been undertaking on the National Security Committee of Cabinet, where I've been a full member of since we formed government. I'm the first Pacific Minister to be an NSC member and now a Cabinet member, and it's quite rare for defence industry to be on NSC. It's generally been the exception rather than the rule, so that just increases the weight and resources, and you're seeing that because the whole of government, the whole of the executive is very attuned to the risks we're facing right now.
You spent a bit of time talking about these risks, about I think you talked about the global rules-based order under threat. You are, of course, Minister for the Pacific. Now, we've had a few voices recently. Everybody loves a former Chief of Army, of course. But General Peter Ley, in the Australian in particular, I think recently, voiced concerns, and they were quite strong concerns, that the Defence Force was stretched too thin. I think he said we're now a liability to ourselves and a strategic liability to our allies. Do you want to come back on that?
Well, first I want to acknowledge and thank Peter Ley for his service. I think it's always important to preface my remarks with that. I think his criticisms would have been more accurate if he'd made them in 2022 rather than 2024. What you've seen over the last 2 years is a massive increase in resources being applied to defence and a huge effort to accelerate capability delivery. I'll give you a couple of examples that he highlighted. The first was Mr. Ley was talking about the lack of long-range fires ability within the Australian Army. Well, on pre-DSR planning, we would not have got a long-range fires brigade, so the long-range strike impact effect for the Australian Army to the mid-2030s. That was the pre-DSR planning timeline. We will have that brigade established in 2026, so 2 years away. Mr. Ley was talking about the lack of missile manufacturing. On pre-2022 planning, we wouldn't have been manufacturing missiles until the middle of the 2030s at best. Without being too political, as hard as that for a politician to resist, the GUIO enterprise was established in 2020. It had no real funding and it had produced two things in 2 years, which were two press releases. Since then, we've allocated $16 to $21 billion of funding to it over the decade, and we'll be making missiles in this country in 2025 on the pathway to making complex and sophisticated missiles as an enduring endeavour. We've brought forward by 7 years Landing Craft Heavy. We've brought forward infantry fighting vehicles such that we'll finish the production run of the IFVs before the pre-22 planning would have had us producing the first one. So We need to accelerate capability. That's one reason I've been appointed to Cabinet, but we're doing that right now.
And is that enough? I mean, as a layperson, you think, look, there's NVIDIA sitting in Taiwan, the largest semiconductor that everyone's relying on. Is it fast enough?
Well, without speculating about possible scenarios, we are reforming defence to improve its speed, to encourage it to take more risk, and that is my job every day with senior defence leadership, is to drive that change. And we are seeing green shoots. So I don't want to sort of play to one company or another in the room, but I will highlight Anduril and the experience there. Anduril and Navy and Defence Science Group started talking in the middle of 2022 about this idea for an extra large autonomous vessel. Anduril and Navy put money in, they put their hands in their own pocket, signed a contract for 3 prototypes to be delivered in 3 years. The first prototype was delivered a year early. And we've got such confidence in it that we announced, I'm not sure whether it was officially today or yesterday, that both sides were putting in a further $20 million to build the manufacturing facility to produce Anduril. It's not Anduril, Go Shark, and that there is funding in the IIP as part of the $10 billion we've allocated to autonomous vessels and drones to fund it into full rate production by the end of next year. So going from an idea and a conversation to prototyping to full rate production in 3 years is light speed in defence. And I want to pay tribute to not just Anduril, but their supply chain that's in the room today. I want to see more of that happening in defence.
Exactly, don't we all? Another, pulling back out a little more again, and to another actually of Peter Lay's comments, are we a little bit all the way with the USA? Speaking as a Australian British, are we going all in with America and potentially facing down a Trump administration where the risk is high, presumably, as to how that administration responds to global defence?
Well, I've just left having morning tea with a US congressional delegation that was bipartisan in nature, and our alliance with the United States is not based on any one administration in either country. It has survived and it will survive changes of government everywhere because it's in the interests of both nations and our enduring interests based on shared values. And on AUKUS itself, I was in Washington in December last year for the votes on the 4 pieces of critical AUKUS legislation. They passed the United States Senate with an 80% yes vote. They passed the House of Representatives with a 75% yes vote. For anything to get an 80% yes vote in the US system is a remarkable sign of bipartisanship. And AUKUS in particular will survive changes of government in all 3 jurisdictions. It's a multi-decadal commitment. It survived a change of government here. In fact, I think it's got stronger. It survived a change of government in the United Kingdom. No matter what happens in November, at some stage in the next 30 years, there will be a change of administration in the United States, and AUKUS will survive. So
you mentioned the UK primes. They're very involved in Pillar 2, for example, BAE Systems, obviously, Rolls-Royce, and of course Babcock, all very heavily, going to be very heavily involved one way or another. We recently did a catalyst in the UK, and it was brilliant to actually hear from Mindy Pi, the new one, Maria Eagle. I wanted to ask you about the new Labour government. Touched on it again briefly, but your relationship, do you know Maria Eagle? What is Labour's relationship with Labour in the UK?
It's very strong. I haven't had the pleasure of meeting Minister Eagle yet, but I've had some really good sessions with John Healey as the Defence Secretary, as has Richard Marles. And
they were together the other day, weren't they?
They were together the other day, but even before then, it's always important to have good relationships with both parties of government, and in a very respectful way to the government of the day. We've been engaging with the senior UK Labour leadership for a long time, as we engage with the senior leadership of the UK Conservative Party. So I know John well, and Stephen Smith is a huge asset in there, and I think our relationship will go from strength to strength. They're doing their own DSR, although I think they're calling it an SDR just to confuse everyone. But they're they're adopting some of the learnings from our process of how do you speed up these reviews. So it goes from strength to strength.
Let's hope that happens. Yes. I should also add, we're big fans of the High Commissioner in London. He's terrific in his work around defence. But looking at, we had IODS, of course, looking at Pillar 1 and how the pace of that goes through. There are questions around the pace. There are questions around this idea of strategic patience and yet shareholder patience, with some in industry thinking these milestones really need to start meeting. There's concern about an Australian election and what that might do to the pace of Pillar 1. How do you come back on that?
Well, I'd say that I've been involved in politics as a minister, a politician, as a staffer for 25 years now, and I've never seen anything that's been declared dead so many times as AUKUS. Like every 2 months, some Johnny on television's getting up and saying it's dead, it's buried, it's cremated, it's gone. And it genuinely goes from strength to strength. People said we would never get the legislation through the US system. And not only Pillar 1, the tech transfer, the ITAR's exemption that was part of the AUKUS legislation is the single most significant legislation around technology transfer in the history of Australia.
Do we need more urgency, though? I mean, I know Vice Admiral Mead was saying, you know, it might be a little bit slower, but it is definitely happening.
Well, we are hitting our milestones. I think Admiral Mead was being frank with people that no defence procurement will go perfectly. Like, only a fool would claim that. And this is the most complex industrial undertaking this country has ever attempted. There are going to be stumbles upon the road. It's how you respond to that. It's how you actually build in for it. So I'll give you an example that really gives me the irrits with the media debate in this country. When we announced the optimal pathway, we didn't use the $368 billion figure, but we knew it would get out there. There was a story a couple of days later because a certain Green senator got a bit of a publicity saying that they'd worked out that there's a 50% contingency in that figure. That's a good thing. This is the most complex undertaking ever taken. If we don't have a healthy contingency, and I think 50% is pretty healthy, I should be sacked. Like, seriously, we're going to discover things that we didn't know before. We're going to have to move fast. We're going to have to catch up at times, and that's why we're putting extra resources into it. Not extra from what we announced, but additional resources above what we think we strictly need because of it. But work's going on in Osborne, work's going on in HMS Stirling. We've had our naval personnel trained in Guam. They're now back here on a US tender. They'll do their first maintenance of a US submarine later this month. We've got ASC personnel at Pearl Harbor learning right now. We've got Navy personnel graduating from the US and UK systems and topping their courses, I might say, as a humble brag.
Yes, very much. She did, didn't she, the Lieutenant?
And not just in the United Kingdom, in the US. Mark Hammond's chewing everyone's ear off about how all of them have been in a top quartile of their class. There are things that will prove challenging, but we're going with our eyes wide open about that.
Terrific. Anybody got a question straight up now? We've got roving mics. Yes. Yes, ma'am, down here the front. And sir, at back. If you wouldn't mind saying where you're from, that would be great.
Sorry, to
Yep.
Hi, Minister. Mark Hodge from DMTC. Wondered if you could comment on the inclusion of defence capability as investment priority areas outside of your department, things like the National Reconstruction Fund, the Advanced Economic Accelerator and so on. How are you going to handle the demarcation disputes around what these other departments are investing in, what are their priorities, and how are they defining what defence capability will look like for their investments?
Yeah, thanks, Mark. I work really closely with Ed Husick as the Industry Minister, so much so that I've appointed him to the Defence Industry Council that I'll be forming soon. We see it as an opportunity. Like the National Defence Strategy used the words national defence intentionally. Our national defence depends upon not just the defence industry, but much broader concept. It goes to things like our fuel stocks, our ability to refine fuel. It goes to critical minerals. But importantly, our industry work outside defence has to complement what we're doing. And I'll give you an example around the National Reconstruction Fund. I'm the main customer for defence industry. So I on behalf of the Department of Defence, I'm being a bit egotistical, but I'm a politician. As the main customer of defence industry, I can shape industry, help it grow. We can also set the requirements. And if you think about the innovation life cycle, ASCA will help technologies develop. I'm, as the customer, then trying to fund it into service, fund the new technologies into service. There's a middle part, which is how do you help those companies scale up and grow? So that's where the National Reconstruction Fund comes in, potentially supporting whether it's an equity injection, soft loans, loans at commercial rate, but they're the first of type to give banks more confidence. So I work really closely with Ed. Austrade is also critical. I think the Team Australia stand at CS Space in Washington or Maryland was the biggest it's ever been. So we're trying to do a national mobilisation of all this, because if we're just relying on the Department of Defence to grow the defence industry, we'll fail. We need a whole nation effort.
How do I turn it on?
Hi, my name's Yvette Allen from Ron Allen Deep Sea Services. We designed, built and piloted Deep Sea Challenger. The first submersible went down the Mariana Trench since Don Walsh. We're now working with Andrew on the supply chain. As a small business, as a family business, we fund ourselves. Banks don't typically fund people like us because they regard defence as a high risk and family business as a high risk. The thing we need is certainty. Cash flow for a small business typically lasts 2.5 months. You can have a delay in defence that goes 4 to 6 months to a year, depending on reviews. Is there any way, I mean, I'm very encouraged by a lot of the things you say, but for us it's certainty, it's money in the bank that we're looking for. I'm sort of reassured, but I suppose what I'm asking for is, can you make that a bit more solid?
Yeah, I think I'd answer that in 3 ways, or maybe 4. First, whenever I talk to SMEs, I get nervous when I ask SMEs what share of their revenue is defence, and if they start saying 60, 70, 80%, I start getting a bit nervous. Like, that's their business decision. Politicians should never give business advice. But diversification, because defence is lumpy at times. It just is. So diversification, particularly for SMEs, is important. Secondly, getting a Department of Defence that understands the industry more effectively and is smarter with contracting is critical. In 2014, the one defence reforms basically upended the entire defence acquisition system. Some of it was positive, a lot of it was negative, and one of them was the abolition of the industry division within DMO. There is currently no industry intelligence unit within the department. Defence's knowledge of industry has gone backwards over the last 10 years, and that's not a reflection on any individual within the department. It's if you don't have a unit responsible for it, you don't value it and you don't measure it. So I'm re-establishing a defence intelligence unit with a defence industry unit in CASG. Its job is to be the focal point for understanding what is going on in industry and to really provide that analytical underpinning for defence. The third point is contracting reform. Like, the ASDEFCON template is in dire need of reform, so contracting is simpler, and that we understand risk, and risk isn't just pushed all the way down the supply chain until we're asking a small business of 5 people to put their house on the line to win an obscure contract as a third-tier supplier for a prime. So contracting reform is important, and strategic partnerships are important. So competition has to drive value for money, but artificial competition doesn't deliver value for money and doesn't allow industry to invest. And I'll give you an example of when I was last in government. In 2008, we discovered we were competing individual ship maintenance periods of as little as 6 weeks. Every time HMS Anzac came into dock, we were competing with industry who would do the maintenance for a 6-week maintenance. That's insane. how can industry plan and make the investment in their workforce and capability if they don't know whether they're winning work next month, let alone in 3 months' time? So we shifted to batching, where we made one company responsible for one class of frigate. We've now got the regional maintenance centre concept. It's not perfect and still got more to do, but strategic partnerships where you have competition at regular intervals to test the market is the way of providing primes and their SME ecosystem much more certainty so they can get on with doing what they do best.
Next one. You have another.
I'm getting off lightly.
Yep. Okay. While you're thinking about that, I just wanted to ask one about the opportunity for Australian industry around sustainment and in the Pacific, and particularly with warfighters. They're sustaining warfighters, which actually there's a tyranny of distance between where they've come from. Where is the opportunity? Can you see that industry growing?
Massively. Like, the sustainment is already 2 or 3 times the size of the acquisition budget. If you think about over the life of a product, it's already where we get much higher levels of Australian industry involvement, typically north of 80%. But we're now focused on not just doing sustainment for us, we're looking at doing sustainment for our allies and partners. So a big part of the AUSMIN outcomes from last year was a commitment to co-development, co-production and co-sustainment of platforms. I'm leading that on GUIO with us producing GMLRs far in excess of what we need to support our allies. But we're doing that in sustainment. So we had the first US Navy Romeo helicopter go through deep level maintenance at the facility at Nowra. That was the identical treatment they'd get if they were back on the west coast of the United States. We had a US Navy submarine come to HMS Stirling and swap out its entire load of Mark 48 heavyweight torpedoes for a batch of Australian Mark 48 heavyweight torpedoes at the maintenance facility, doing the work exactly the same as if it was done in Pearl Harbor. So us doing sustainment for our partners is good for them because it's a lot closer to potential conflict zones than the west coast of the United States or Portsmouth or wherever, but it also is good for Australian business. JSF, we're building with BAE the stealth coating facility at RAF Williamtown in my neck of the woods. We're intentionally building that bigger than what we need just to do stealth coatings for our strike fighters, but to look at the thousands, it is more than 1,000 joint strike fighters that are in the Indo-Pacific. So
Gotcha.
You can see more of that. It helps preparedness for our partners and it helps industry here.
One of the things that struck me, and we've got, of course, land forces coming up in Melbourne shortly. Just a couple of years ago, armies were shrinking, and yet we're seeing the real areas of combat. It's close combat, the warfare that we're looking at, particularly in Ukraine, which you referred to. So much of the kit now, there seems to be a focus on kitting out what is actually happening on the ground. Now, that's very much advanced capability, Pillar 2. What is going on with ASCA itself? Are there other opportunities? Is it all through ASCA? Are there opportunities around? I see the Chaos One boys are here today, but how can we get closer to the warfighter and deliver to the warfighter?
Well, each of the services have their own what's called miners program. It's effectively their own pool of funds to fund innovation. That was the first source, for example, for the Go Shark investment was the Australian Navy's own funding platform. So that's still going on. ASCA is the key driver because ASCA is very different from previous attempts at defence innovation in this country because it recognises our limited budget. We don't have the size of budget of the UK or US for defence innovation, so we need to narrow it down because one of the key lessons from the innovation hubs is it was very hard to get a grant, and if you got one, it took a long time to get into contract, and even if you did, if you proved up the technology, there was generally no pathway to service, so the technology died in the valley of death. What we're doing with ASCA is narrowing down what are the technology areas we're concentrating on. Warfighters will decide that, so the capability managers will say, this technology will give me an asymmetric advantage on the battlefield in 5 years' time, therefore fund that. We then run the missions, and the quid pro quo for industry is by getting the capability manager involved at the start, we nail their feet to the floor so that there's actually a funding stream into service. GoShark is the first example of that. We're running a mission right now around a small sovereign uncrewed aerial system. We announced it in August last year. We had over 100 industry inquiries. We down selected to 11 in October. We had a fly-off in April, and we're down to funding 3 or 4 into the next stage. That's very fast by Defence. But most importantly, there's a pathway to deployment at the end because we funded the IIP adequately for these new technologies.
Great to hear from Emily Hilder in London as well. So now, look, has anybody got another question? Yes?
Hi, Minister Charles Salinas. I have a question concerning the established SMEs for the primes. Is it your idea that that's sufficient to deliver AUKUS, their known supply chain? I deal with a lot of SMEs that have technical and manufacturing backgrounds that are waiting to see what part they play, and there's no plan. They haven't heard anything. They don't know. As you know, 98% of the industry in this country is SMEs, and a lot of them are very small, but they can be aggregated. My background, by the way, is in procurement. But there's been no talk of aggregation. There's been no brief on anything. What they need is a plan, and they need some leadership. So is it going to come from the primes, or is it going to come from the government, or where's it coming from?
Well, I might get one of my advisors, Tony, to pass on his details to you, because there is a plan, and I would encourage your clients to engage with ASA on it. The short answer is we're building that SME base right now. We're identifying SMEs that could be part of the supply chain, not just for SSN AUKUS, but sustaining Virginia class and helping build US Virginia class. We've got what's called DivQ, which is the qualification process that we've funded for Australian companies.
Qualifications seem to be key to get those small businesses when they get to those trade shows. They've got to have the right qualification.
You've got to demonstrate that you've got all the security and technical capacity to work in a nuclear environment. That's why we're funding that. But importantly, we're not just doing that. The large primes, particularly the US primes at this stage, but I know BAE will be working on this as well, and ASC, are funding their own programs of identifying Australian companies that can support their efforts. I know Huntington Ingalls would have established a local presence and a partnership with Babcock, but they've engaged with well over 300 Australian companies identifying who can support not just activities in Australia, but in the United States. 70% of the parts that are on the critical supply chain pathway for the US Virginia class are sole source. They have massive supply chain vulnerabilities, and they're very keen for Australian companies to help resolve that, and they're very motivated. So we'll get your details, sir, and get ASA to engage. We need ASA to increase their industry engagement. They recognise they need to move faster, but the primes have been leading the way. And the US have allocated $17 billion US, including $3 billion of our money, to grow their submarine industrial base, but that also includes activities in Australia.
Time for one last quick question. Anyone's? Yes?
Hello, Minister, my name's Sarah Pavillard from Adroita. I just want to go back to your comments, if I may, on co-production, co-development and co-sustainment. One of the great opportunities presented by AUKUS has been the regulatory reform around export controls in all 3 nations. But one of the great challenges that particularly British and Australian industry still face relates to the technologies and other elements, articles that aren't covered by the export exemptions. I refer particularly to services, technical assistance, professional services. How do you see the full integration of the trilateral industrial base if such a key element to co-sustainment isn't fully integrated in that US piece on export controls?
Thanks for the question, and it's always good to hear from you. The exemption list for the ITAR's exemption bill is something that I think will be a living document. There'll be some areas that will be no-go zones from day one, like weapons of mass destruction that we want no part of. And we don't want the ability to be in a technology, an exemption where there is no restrictions on technology transfer in those areas. There's areas where there clearly, there'll be a complete licence-free environment. And then there's the grey area where we need to work out exactly what we need and for the systems to resolve that. And I think there are some areas where they're on the exemption list at the moment that I think we're still working through. So I think it'll be a living process, and where we hit stumbling blocks, resolving them and finding what I'm calling pipe cleaners. So I copped a bit of flack for starting our missile manufacturing journey with a relatively simple missile in the GMLRS missile, but that's because that's a system pipe cleaner. If we can't get the technology transfer right for that, we're not going to get it for something much more sophisticated and complex. So finding those pathfinders, finding out what are still the obstacles and resolving them in a systematic way is a critical role for both myself and the relevant parts of the department.
Minister, you have been wonderful in terms of your access for everybody here today. Thank you so much for speaking with me. I'd love to hand over now to Andrew Cridland, Chief Executive of Babcock Australia and New Zealand, to give a vote of thanks and say a few words. Andrew, thank you.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, it's been wonderful to be here today for the Australian-British Chamber of Commerce Defence Industry Business Lunch. So I'd like to thank the Honourable Pat Conroy, Minister for Defence Industry and Capability Delivery, for the insights you've given us today, both on your presentation but also during the Q&A. And I reiterate what's already been said to say that it's great to see that the hard work that you've been doing in the defence portfolio has been recognised with your recent elevation to Cabinet last week. And I think it's been mentioned, but certainly having two front bench ministers as part of this portfolio is no doubt going to increase the opportunities that industry have for engagement, and we look forward to seeing how this progresses in the future. Picking up particularly and noting the addition of the capability delivery to your ministry title and remit, and I think that everyone in industry is really pleased to see that, and certainly we at Babcock recognise the crucial role that capability delivery plays in maintaining a really robust, responsive and effective defence posture in Australia. And so I think that prioritisation within the portfolio highlights really the urgency to which we need that development of the sovereign capability as we prepare to operate in an even more challenging environment regionally. And so certainly from Babcock's perspective, capability delivery is really at the heart of what we do. Our aim is to create a safe and secure world together, from submarine and surface ship sustainment to secure communications to life-saving helicopter operations. Our 26,000 employees, of which 1,800 are based in Australasia, really enjoy working with our customer to ensure that they are equipped with what they need for their future missions. And as we say at Babcock, your mission is our mission. We've been talking a bit about AUKUS today, and Babcock is a world leader in nuclear-powered submarine capability. In the UK, they sustain the Navy and manage the infrastructure on 2 out of the 3 nuclear bases in the UK, which also includes operating the only licensed facility for refuelling, for refitting and for defueling nuclear-powered submarines. And locally here in Australia, we provide in-service support for the maintenance of the Collins-class submarines, both in South Australia and also in WA, alongside the continued sustainment of the Anzac-class frigates through the Warship Asset Management Agreement and also the Regional Maintenance Provider West contract. And I think that for us, that being the Commonwealth Surface Fleet Sustainer in Western Australia means that we can fulfil that role not only here, but we do it also in New Zealand as well. Across the land domain, we're involved in the developing of the Australia Defence Force's high-frequency communications program, the upgrade of that. And again, all this relates to that capability delivery that we can do here by pulling on not only the experiences that exist in our parent company in the UK, but also as we're developing here locally in Australia. And so for that reason, Babcock is really passionate and highly committed around developing Australasian and Australian industry capability, including the work we do with our Indigenous and veteran-owned suppliers. And we engage in around 2,000 suppliers nationwide to deliver on behalf of Defence. And I'm pleased to acknowledge some of our suppliers that we have here with us today, including Osbright, Bravo Electrical and HVAC, Shadbolt Group, ICAD Engineering, Flowtech, Favcoat and Eptic Group. So Babcock is working closely with government bodies and also with the organisations that support us through the improvements in things like the onboarding and the pre-qualification, which we've heard today. And that's all about making it easier for Australian industry. A couple of examples of that. So we've recently signed up to the JOSCAR system, which is a really efficient way for suppliers to get involved and have the efficiencies and the savings as a result of JOSCAR. And we're starting to see that now as they connect into a single supplier management community. And just last month, we've commenced on the Global Supplier Program, which is a government initiative, and it's all around identifying and allowing for local SMEs to access the wider opportunities that exist globally and plugging into our international programs. So just in conclusion then, Babcock is a proud supporter of the Australian-British Chamber of Commerce, and I'd like to thank Tikki Fullerton and her team for putting together this event today, and also more recently the Defence Catalyst event over in London, which we were a part of. Babcock has enjoyed a long association with the Australian-British Chamber of Commerce, and it's a relationship that we very much value. So thank you again, Minister Conroy and the Australia-British Chamber of Commerce team, and thank you all for being here today. Good afternoon.
Well, thank you so much, everybody. I hope you've enjoyed today. Our best wishes for the Minister as he goes forward in his bigger, newer role. There is half an hour that we've got for networking here. If you'd like to stay and chat, please do so. Otherwise, I'd like to call out Olivia and Pat, our events manager, and Jenny Garber. Thank you to my team for helping to put on this event. So enjoy your afternoon. Thank you so much.